important to give a little bit the sense of what I've seen, what I've witnessed, and seen with my eyes, and breathe and smell with my nose, and give you a little bit the sense of the situation at the moment. Normally, you know, we have a lot of data that we can share, but those you can find. So what I thought today to start with is to give you a little bit of, you know, 5 images that have kind of remained in my mind after these 3 weeks that speaks about some elements of what we are witnessing and dealing with as a humanitarian community in the Gaza Strip in these days. First of all, I think that the events that have unfolded in Rafah since the 7th of May, with the subsequent move of up to almost 1 million people that found refuge for months in Rafah, and now that they've moved all in a sudden, despite the fact that some areas of Rafah, in fact, has no evacuation order, or you know, some contested this expression because it's the way that the Israeli used, but in fact is forcible transfer of people. The result of it is that the narrowing space that is left for civilians to conglomerate and leave is becoming the more and more limited, and the more and more crowded. It's impossible as of today to move from Mawasi, where some of our premises are, to go to Khan Yunis or Deir Bala without literally navigating through a wave of people that are everywhere. A movement that normally would take 10 minutes, 15 minutes maximum, is taking simply 1 hour because people are everywhere. What we have witnessed, particularly in the last 2 weeks, is the more and more movement of people going north.
For them to sign in. Sorry.
From
happening?
Those who are online, thank you. The more and more you can cross, you know, people leaving with whatever they can gather, putting in donkey cart and piling them up at unbelievable height. And these images of, you know, people with very little things that are moving the entire life to a safer place, if there is anything safe. The days of some days, you know, the good season is coming. The temperature have increased, and one day I was driving along the coastal road, and I noticed that all of a sudden an enormous amount of people were on the shore and actually on the sea. And then I stopped there and I start asking, you know, if there was anything special. And what I've been told is that the living condition within the tent is so hot during the day, and of course there is lack of water for people within the tents, and so people basically are going to the sea to find some opportunity to cool themselves down because of the high temperature of the day, and by doing this also they take the opportunity to wash themselves, because there is no other ways that people can maintain some decent hygiene. This intensity of living condition is progressively eroding the social fabric of the community in Gaza. For those who have frequented ever, Gaza is Gazawi are very welcoming people. They are they are formidable guests when you go to see them. They always will put something on the table. Even the poorest families will figure out a way to welcome you in some way. And the social bonding of the families and the extended families is fundamental in the society. What we are witnessing the more and more is that this fabric is progressively being destroyed, where the rule of the strongest is becoming the only rule that is prevailing, simply because there is so little for people to survive that only the strongest can have access to that, and that has eroded and penetrated even the relations within family members. You know, I've met with some people, and they were telling me how there was a dispute between brothers around a can of chickpeas, and because of that can of chickpeas, two brothers and their families were not speaking anymore to each other and losing that network of mutual solidarity and support that is essential in situations of despair like this, simply because, you know, not even that the family is able to go beyond this depriving situation that everybody is confronted to day in, day out. The living conditions of everybody, including the people around ourselves, is further compounded by the lack of, you know, basic commodities and access to simple tools and equipment and materials that will allow, for example, families to cook their meal. So something that stayed in my mind in these days was that when you approach, you know, the time for dinner, most probably the only meal of the day for many, the odor that you can smell all around the tent and the makeshift tents that are all around our places is very, very acre and strong, because people burn whatever they can find, and mostly they can find, you know, basically plastic and garbages that they can use to warm up their dinner. There is no electricity, as you know. There is no cooking gas, or there is very scarce cooking gas, and even when it is available, people do not have the means to access to the cooking gas and buy the cooking gas. And so people used to burn, and you see all day long children and
that okay
women.
with you?
Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Children and women are going around all day long collecting garbages and pieces of paper, plastic, whatever they can find, to be able then in the evening to cook their dinner. And the last image that stayed and is quite shocking and strong in my mind is, as you know, on the 26th of May, one site within the safe zone has been hit by an airstrike, who has ignited a big fire in a tented area in proximity of the UNRWA log base, which of course has not only killed the people on the spot, but also then the consequences of the fire have killed a considerable amount of people. The services that the ambulances that went there brought the wounded and the bodies of the victims to the hospitals that are concentrated along the Mawasi area, field hospitals. And I was talking with the director of one of these field hospitals. He's a guy that is navigated in humanitarian world, has been doing many missions in war zones. He himself comes from a country where he grew up amongst war. And he was telling me, in describing this scene, that he had to deal with, almost with tears in his eyes. Among the people that they have collected, there were men, probably around in his 40s, 50s, who was still hugging his daughter, the small corpse of his daughter, and they were both burned and carbonized by the fire. And they tried to separate the two bodies, but they couldn't, because they were so entangled, and so the only way to do that was to break in the bones, and they refused to do so. And they said they decided to leave them together in this final and eternal hug. That was for me, the image of the collective trauma and the images of the violence that will mark people forever. And I do not understand how children will recover from this, unimaginable and difficult to describe situation of constant trauma that they have to go through. Situation, of course, of you follow, I think, our reports. Fatalities have reached almost 36,000 people. There has been a lot of discussions about the number of fatalities, and I think that we have clarified that the numbers that we're reporting are reported by MOH. Recently, we had a clarification from MOH. They could identify out of those fatalities a certain number of people, but the overall number of fatalities remain at almost 36,000 people have been killed. We have reached, unfortunately, almost 80,000 wounded. The situation of the health systems have been described over and over again by WHO colleagues, and the fact that we have to count on field hospitals, which are not, fully operational hospitals. They are field hospitals, so they are in tents, and with the limitations of what this entails. It means that these people can only be treated in suboptimal conditions, despite the never-ending efforts that the medical teams that have been deployed from all over the world are doing. It is still very, very heartbreaking to see the condition upon which these people, the injured people, can find a place where to be treated. There are gigantic efforts done by WHO also to re-establish or maintain services in the hospital in the middle area and in Khan Yunis area. But as far as Rafah is concerned, there are no more functioning hospitals, properly said. It's only field hospitals. The displacement, as I said, is continuing to move toward the middle area, in an area where now there were already a lot of people. Now we have added another 1 million people, more or less, 950,000 that have left Rafah. And one thing that people discussing in these days was telling me is that it took them months to get used to the new life in Rafah, understanding where they were, finding the right place to look for services, to look for food, to look for water, and find some sort of decent life despite all the challenges and the dire conditions. And now that they have to be displaced once again, they have to relearn all this. They have to refine their footprint and understand how they will deal with the simplest necessities of every day. Out of this, almost 1 million people displaced, colleagues from UNFPA were reminding us, we estimate more or less there are 20,000 pregnant women that will again lose any point of reference for bringing their pregnancy to an end in conditions that are suitable for and adequate for a proper delivery for their babies. And so again, this nightmare of finding where will this new life come into life, which conditions, where this will be done. Shelter is, of course, particularly challenges. As you know, we have had gigantic challenges to bring in the tents and the tarpaulin and all the material that is needed to set up new tents, because there is not much sites left intact. Moving out from Rafah, we have calculated that 36 sites of UNRWA that were hosting IDPs have been lost. Those were mainly schools that were turned into IDP centers, and those people will not have with them any material. So it means that at least for those 36 centers, people will go out without anything in their hands, and they will be in the necessity to find a tent or plastic sheeting and some pieces of wood to make their new shelter. And of course, with all the risk that, as you have, fortunately, with the bombardment of the tented area, with the risk associated of living in inflammable material that, of course, when hit, has created that terrible fire. The amount of solid waste that is accumulated everywhere along the streets is impressive. We've not been able to access landfill because landfills are normally decentralized compared to the populated areas, which means that they're basically in the margins along the fence and so toward Israel or Egypt. And those areas are absolutely not accessible. And we've been, despite multiple requests to have access to those areas, the access has been denied. And so in the meantime, we are looking desperate for alternative sites. Some have been identified. Of course, they are in proximity of people, and let me imagine what it means with 35 degrees in daylight, if not more, with this mountains of solid waste concentrated there. Education is, as you know, since the 6th of October, 7th of October, has been suspended. And for me, one of the discussions we had with colleagues on the ground that are trying to work with children and find solutions to at least, if not offering a formal education, at least offering an informal education. But, recreational material is still considered today non-humanitarian assistance and is never been allowed in by the government of Israel into Gaza. So we have a mass of more than 600,000 students that did not access education since now 8 months and have no activities other than those improvised by the local NGOs that are very creatively trying to find some time and space and create some activities for those children. But the reality is that there is very little that we can offer, and hence just the exposure to this violence and these very harsh living conditions that I'm sure will mark this generation of children for the long term, which nobody knows what will be the long-term impact on these children. The operational environment remains extremely challenging. At times I wonder if the humanitarian operation in Gaza are crippled by design. We are trying to save lives every day, but the reality is that our hands have been tied on our back since the very beginning, and despite all our engagement with the parties trying to gain more space, we didn't have the chance to solve some of the issues. Some have moved, and then some conversation brought some results, but the bulk of those remains unchanged. We were used to say months back, that someone has broken our legs, and now all of a sudden they're asking us to run. I think we have learned to run with crutches, if you want, and now they have taken away the crutches also, because that's our daily struggle to solve issues and challenges that have practical solutions, but somehow they are never fully addressed. And when we address one element, there is yet another bottleneck, yet another challenge that we are dealing with. We stopped, doing the tit for tat with the Israeli on these things, but reality is that there are some basic support that we've been asking over and over again that has never been granted to us, and those same equipment or material are the basic upon which any expansion of an humanitarian operation should be based upon. The amount of amazing work that colleagues in Gaza are doing, despite all these challenges, is simply, beyond remarkable. It's very dangerous at times in our operations. There are long days, 14 hours a day, or 14 hours a day of work, day in, day out. There is no weekend, of course. And despite all this, we're still accused of not being able to keep up the pace, when the parties know exactly why this is happening and why we're not able to do everything we should be able to do. Also, the effort of local and international NGOs is commendable, considering all the challenges and the obstacles we have. Just to give you an example, in order to bring in new and fresh medical teams in particular, but in general humanitarian aid workers, we had to organize convoys that bring them through Kerem Shalom. The only way out to do this in safety is, of course, the armored vehicle that only the UN possess. And only international drivers can do this type of operation. The other week, we tried to do one of these operations. We have been delayed for hours and hours and hours to get the green light to bring to reach the crossing and collect the incoming and let go the outgoing people. And after hours of waiting, we've been told at 7 o'clock in the evening that it was no longer possible to cross outside and going into Israel. So we had to abort the operations, and that took 7 vehicles of the United Nations with 7 international drivers, 4 of which were head of agencies. An entire day. We have been out for 13 hours just to do that one single movement, and it was aborted at the very last moment. And this is one of the many obstacles we have, not to mention the fact that even to reach that place, we have to go through what is considered to be a safe road, and notwithstanding that we have been caught in crossfire repeatedly. It's very challenging, the coordination with the parties and with Israeli. It remains very challenging. We keep on trying to, of course, we engage with them, and of course we try to propose and solutions that are concrete and actionable. But really, there is still quite a journey to walk, and I really believe and hope that we will be able in the coming weeks to untangle some of this aspect. One of the challenges, of course, once we bring inside assistance, then, is to make sure that the assistance reaches the most vulnerable people, because everybody has been obsessed about counting trucks since the very beginning, including most of you. The problem is that this is not the end of humanitarian aid. Actually, it is the beginning, because the journey starts from when the commodities are delivered in Gaza, inside Gaza, just across the border. The challenge then is to bring it into the women, the children, the elderly, the people with disability that needs that support, because nobody else is taking care of them otherwise. And that is still very challenging, both in terms of the security, safety, logistical aspect of getting there, but also, unfortunately, once again, we are living through the breakdown of law and order. And 2 days ago, we had the worst of our experiences in bringing in commodities, where almost 70% of the convoy that we were able to put together for that day did not reach the final destination because it was intercepted by mostly, I think, by criminals, but also by desperate people that were simply, beyond any ability to wait and see assistance coming. It's really challenging for us to do all these operations without equipment. We've been asking over and over again, communications, armored vehicles, the maintenance of the vehicles that we are having inside Gaza. There's not a single vehicle that is not bringing the marks of the volatile, unsafe, dangerous environment that we are working in, and protective equipment for the personnel, and so on and so forth. And still, when we try to bring in even the most simpler of the equipment, a router, just to make sure that we can communicate with the teams and we can coordinate the response of the humanitarian community, we failed to do it so because it was not the coordination was not granted. I really commend the work of all the colleagues that are there. All the United Nations together are trying to, mutualize our resources, assets, and personnel to keep afloat these operations and this response. But the challenges are at times overwhelming, and I am amazed to see that every morning at 6 o'clock the teams wake up and restart to engage in another day, trying to bring assistance to people. It's simply beyond my ability to express in words the thankfulness that I have for the bravery and the determination of our colleagues and the resilience of the civilians that are keep on trying to find a way to survive this war. I stop here and I'm happy to respond to your questions.
Andrea, thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A few quick follow-ups and then a question. Where are you now doing this briefing from? You said that about 950,000 Palestinians have left Rafah. Does that mean that there are still about 500,000 or maybe more than that left in Rafah itself? And on this looting incident 2 days ago, can you give us some more details on where that convoy was coming from and where it was going? And my question is, actually, what, if any, food, water, and medicine are getting into Gaza? And do you see the prospects or famine actually setting in, because you were there for 3 weeks? Thank you.
Am I answering one by one?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm in Jerusalem, in my office in Jerusalem. I came back Friday, and I'm here in Jerusalem today. In Rafah, we have roughly 1.4 million people, but that includes the governorates. So Rafah city, as of today, considering that Tal al-Sultan is the most westward neighborhood of Rafah, and I was driving through it on Friday morning. It is quite desertic. It's a ghost area by now. We estimate that maybe in towns scattered here and there might be up to 100,000 people. And then you have some people remaining in the, including the people that are remaining in the coastal area, which is farther west from the built-up area. And so the entire population then has moved, as I said, to Khan Yunis and in Deir Balah. The convoy was a convoy that was organized by joint efforts between WFP and UNRWA. It was a pickup of commodities from the Kerem Shalom, so Kerem Abu Salem, so the Gaza side of Kerem Shalom. That is, as you might know, thanks to the Egyptians reopening of the commodities access, humanitarian commodities, only for the UN and NGOs. Now we had a considerable amount of trucks that were allowed in, and the Israeli facilitated the drop-off in the yard, and that's the communication that the Israeli keep on doing, that we are slow in picking them up. But the condition to go to pick up these commodities, of course, are very challenging. As I said, the new road that has been built by the Israeli is a road that passes north of the airport. They have progressively expanded the road to make it a bit more easier for us to go through it. But then when he enters into neighborhood in proximity of Salahuddin, this is still an area of battles. So that's why we have had a lot of problems. And from there on, the convoys take it to the north along Salahuddin Road. And basically they could go either directly to Rafah from there or going a bit north and Khan Yunis and Derbala. And in that area, the first stretch of Salahuddin Road, the vast majority of the trucks were stopped by individuals, and they were completely looted. What is I think important to understand is that effort of ours is not only to support the backbone of the operation with the WFP and UNRWA, and WHO and UNFPA, so all the agencies that have been very active, and UNICEF, that have been very active in the response, but also our NGO partners. And some of our NGO partners lost the entire consignment for, even a month, up to a month of their operations. So it is utterly disappointing to see that. Today there was a communication signed by the community leaders from Gaza. They were using very strong words, condemning those attacks, which is positive. I think that is important to have the community pushing for avoid those events to repeat itself. But it gives you just the sense of the number of challenges that we have inside, and the reality that we're facing on the ground. With the famine question, first of all, the colleagues that are looking into the data and the IPC, the new data set on the IPC is still under collection and verification. You might remember before the 7th of May, when the Rafah operation started, there was a moment where, it was a few weeks actually, where the Israeli had really, pushed for increase of not only humanitarian aid, and actually was more private sector and commercial activities than humanitarian aid, which was overall positive because it allows the market to receive a series of products. The limitation of that are twofold. First of all, they do not go everywhere in Gaza because still reaching the north is a bit complicated. So only a little portion of those goods that we've seen appearing in the market in the south have appeared in the north. And then there is an issue of the diversification of these products. Some of these products are, for sure, to the benefit of the population, but they are not addressing the most urgent needs in the way we see them, and they are not providing the variety and the diversification of food and nutrition that will allow to tackle famine. And then there is a fundamental issue of affordability. So a vast part of the population, civilian population in Gaza, simply cannot afford to buy those items. So, while we see in the markets at least vegetables and fruit have appeared, and some other, there are eggs. We saw some of this product, coming into the market, which is absolutely essential. But still, we have a problem of making sure that those can be, to the benefit of the most vulnerable population. And that's why I was talking about a little bit the law of the strongest, because my sense is that the most vulnerable people still needs to be assisted and supported by our efforts. I cannot speak about, is this getting closer or maintaining a sort of status quo on the looming threat of famine. For this, we have to defer to the colleagues that are doing the IPC study, and they will tell us. For sure, though, in the north, the situation is a bit more complex. I think that the opening of Zikim in the north has made a very positive impact in the north, where we are still 350,000 people. And there is a steady entry of some commodities, there is an issue more about diversification of those commodities. And I think this is something that the colleagues of WFP, UNRWA, and the humanitarian community altogether are trying to work out to make sure that we can also change the current situation there. Over.
Okay, Michelle?
Thanks, Andrea. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. We've seen some photos, of starving children and children who've died from malnutrition and whatnot. What did you see while you were there in terms of malnutrition, and how widespread was that? And then under this new sort of deal that's being that President Biden spoke about on Friday, there would be 600 trucks daily coming in. Is that enough?
So in terms of sign of malnutrition, it is a bit more complex than that. Famine, as expert of UNICEF or WFP and FAO will tell you, is a combination effect of food, nutrition, health, and water and sanitation. Is the combined effect of these elements all together that results in malnutrition. So yes, there are cases of malnourished children that have been reported, documented, and identified, particularly in the north, and to a lesser extent in the south. But we cannot be distracted only by, it's not that the individuals have malnutrition, they have it, just is the measurement of the MUAC is not sufficient. It's the combination of those elements. As I said, the IPC colleagues are working on this, and they will for sure come out with an updated set of information that will give more clarity on where we are in terms of these elements. The last time that we've done this, there were 30%, a bit more, of children under the age of 2 in the north of Gaza that suffer from acute malnutrition, and 10% of children under the age of 2 in Rafah. This was the starting point when we last measured that. So hopefully in the coming weeks we'll have more information about that. On the 600 trucks and on the current negotiations, first of all, the United Nations has not been yet fully involved in this discussion, so I don't really have more than what has been told to media about that. And as I said in previous intervention with you, it's not, the counting trucks is not the right metrics, because it's about also the quality of what we receive. To give you an example, I was discussing with partners that are dealing with people with disabilities, and they have identified a series of adult and children that needs some supportive devices. So assistive devices, sorry. Those assistive devices are simply not available in the market. So unless we prioritize the right things for this type of particularly vulnerable population, we will not be able to alleviate their suffering, their conditions. So it cannot only be about how many trucks. Another example that is clear is, you can have a truck with mattresses, and then you will probably deliver mattresses to 100 people. But you can have a truck with fuel that is giving fuel for the desalination plant, that is giving water, drinking water for 500,000 people for a day. So it's different ways to measure, and I think we have to make sure that the United Nations and the humanitarian community can contribute to the prioritization of how these commodities are prioritized to enter Gaza, in order to address the most urgent needs of people.
Gabriel?
Hi, Andrea. Thank you very much for the briefing. Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. Just 2 questions. One is, thank you very much for the briefing. Some Israeli officials have said in recent days that they expect that this war could go on until the end of the year. My question to you is, from a humanitarian standpoint, what would be the impacts of that if that is indeed true? And my second question is more of a hypothetical, which I normally don't like to ask, but if there was to be a full ceasefire tomorrow and all of the border crossings were to be fully open, it seems like the situation in Gaza is so dire that it would take, I should ask you, what would it take after a ceasefire and the borders are open, the border crossings are open, to get in the amount of aid and reestablish some semblance of what is needed there? Thank you.
So the perspective of having a war until the end of the year is simply terrifying in my mind. I was reflecting a little bit on all this dynamic of the criticism moved to the United Nations, the inability to deliver, the inability to the humanitarian community to deliver, and I, I've lived on my skin in the last 3 weeks how complicated it is to operate, and honestly, I think there is no other place in the world where the system has been put to such level of challenges and stretch. Honestly, I believe that there is no other place where the UN would still be present in the current conditions that we're living in Gaza, if it was not for the fact that Gaza is the only place where people cannot flee. And so the Secretary General made a very clear commitment that the UN will stay and deliver in order to alleviate the suffering of people in Gaza. And it takes what it takes. So for me, the idea of extending this war for another 6 months or 7 months is simply, terrible. But we will stay and deliver. We will keep on trying and doing our job day in, day out to the end of our ability. And the concern for me is how people will cope with this, because I cannot, what we've witnessed in the last 2 weeks is the growing tension within communities. The law of the strongest that I was describing earlier is accompanied with increasing family disputes, increasing fighting between Palestinians, families, and violence, and not only across families, but at times within families. And I wonder where is the breaking point where it will become completely impossible for us to operate properly and within all these challenges. So it is really a question that the international community should ask itself: where is the limit acceptable in this situation? If in an ideal scenario tomorrow we have a ceasefire, I think that the first and most important element of it is that people will stop, civilians will stop being victims of bombardments, and the killing of civilians will stop. The feeling of complete uncertainty that we have confronted every day going into Tal al-Sultan. Tal al-Sultan is the neighborhood in Rafah where our offices were based. Every day we were going there, people were asking us, are you coming back tomorrow? Because they saw us as the parameters of how dangerous it was to stay there. And when they realized that we were no longer going there because the Israelis have asked us to coordinate our movements, and they have not allowed us then to go in there because of the security conditions prevailing in the area, people realized all of a sudden that there was a problem coming through, and most probably the fighting was coming down. So I think that in an ideal scenario of a ceasefire, that will be a gigantic relief for people. And then I think is the combination of private sector and humanitarian assistance combined together that will be able to start progressively resuming and bringing people life to dignity and to some sort of normalcy. It won't be easy. It will be a very long and very complicated journey. There are some areas of Gaza that are no more. They simply do not exist anymore. They are just rubble and total destruction. So we cannot fix that in a few weeks. But for sure, people at least will be relieved by the fear of being killed in any moment in every place across Gaza.
Abdulhamid?
Thank you, Andrea. Abdulhamid Sayam from the Arabic Daily, Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Thank you for the briefing. And I just don't want to comment about some senior UN officials still don't call it a genocide after what you have said. But my question, Andrea, is personal. How do you cope with these atrocities, seeing what you see day to day? How do you see these children? How can you endure the pain you see in the eyes of women running from their homes? How do you endure seeing a child dying of famine in front of your eyes and you feel helpless to bring him back to life? I remember Chris Gunness in 2008 started crying.
that we have went through. हमने last year so Cadbury जो हमारा chocolate का flagship brand है, it's a household name और it is about inspiring goodness in Pakistan through different narratives. And then we said,
share with us your personal feeling, what you see during your when you go to bed at night. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdulhamid. I do have children, 3 of them, and they are of ages that are, comparable to many of the children that I've seen in Gaza. And I cannot not think as a parent how I would live the nightmare that these children are going through. And that's why I made a point earlier about the unacceptable situation where recreational kids are rejected by Israel because they are not considered humanitarian aid. I found that really problematic. And how I cope with it is,
households. What can we do through the advocacy of our brand? So I'll share one of the experience that we have went through. हमने last year so Cadbury जो हमारा chocolate का flagship brand है, it's a household name और it is about inspiring goodness in Pakistan through different narratives. And then we said, we want to become the part of the nation's fabric cricket because we wanted to. We had a business objective around it in terms of driving deeper reach and messaging of our brand. We said, we want to become the part of so we came up with the campaign fabric cricket, and we said that we are going to create role model business objective around it in Pakistan. We said, we want to become the part of all the 11 players of nation's fabric cricket because we wanted to be on a package business objective around it in terms of driving deeper reach and messaging of our brand distributed across the masses.
The little that has been provided to Gazawi today would probably not be there, and only the prevailing rule of the strongest, which is certainly not taking care of the vulnerable people, women, children, disabled, elderly. They would be in a much worse condition. So I do not have time to cry, even if at times I have to say that I have to swallow it, simply because I think there is something more important that we have to do today, which is trying to do the best of what we can. And even if it is not, up to the highest standard, it is the best we can do given the prevailing circumstances that have been imposed on us.
Okay, Deji, and then Nabil.
Andrea, Dutch issue with China Central Television. Basically, 2 questions. First, you mentioned about the situation there, the rule of jungle, not the rule of law in Gaza. Can you tell us what is the security there for the UN operations, given the fact that 2 days ago, just 70% of a convoy has been looted by what you described as criminals. And second, my colleague Gabriel asked you the question on the possible ceasefire. But my question here is, given the fact you describe all the situation, how much time do you think the ceasefire could make a difference? 6 weeks? Can 6 weeks really make a difference? And second, you mentioned about the trucks. It's not a good strategy to contain the trucks. It's a quality. But there's such a destruction there. Do you think that there's even a possibility to get in 600 trucks in the beginning of the ceasefire? Thank you.
So the security situation is something that we've seen deteriorating already in the past. You might remember there was a moment where we were already saying that there was a breakdown of law and order. Unfortunately, something that we have to deal with because we do not have control over that. The reality is that we've seen not only systematic targeting of the police in Gaza, and so the system has completely disappeared, and hence given us the space to either powerful families or criminals or whatever is remaining of the authorities in situ. I think it is super important for us to discuss with the communities and explain them. The only reason why we have been able to stay and deliver is because, to some degrees, we have preserved community acceptance. And we have to discuss with the communities, explain them how we operate, why we do things in a way we do it, in order for them to ensure that our operations are somehow protected and viable. Would we lose that space? It won't be possible for us to operate any longer, for us and for our partners. The 600 trucks, it's a good question. I think it is challenging. As I said earlier, it's not about quantity, it's about quality, but even the quantity is a problem, of course, and that will require a gigantic effort combined of private sector and the United Nations and the partners all together, the humanitarian community, because it is a very, very ambitious target that will only be viable if we have, the fact that there is no combat is already something that will allow us to use better the daylight time and more efficiently the resources. Potentially, if all the bottlenecks and the challenges that we are facing inside would be solved, the number of assets available with probably some injection of additional trucks will allow us to do multiple rotation that will bring us to the 600. But we won't be able to do it on day one, and we certainly won't be able to do it without the collaboration and the coordinated effort with the private sector.
Thank you so much. We'll go to the next question. Nabil, please go ahead.
Hi, Nabil Abisab, Al Arabi TV station. So since Friday, since left the Strip, and do you know where would they be going? To what countries? Is it neighboring countries or other countries? And my third question is about the Cyprus corridor. I think it's a maritime corridor. Is it still functioning at all? Thank you.
So I did not see any sign of an impact of the ceasefire or anything that has been related to me by colleagues on the ground. I also have to say that this, at the moment, is a very high-level strategic and senior political level, so maybe it's not yet trickling down.